Okay, we'll get started for our session this afternoon and evening for some other people who are joining us remotely. So welcome again to Atlanta for those who made it, and good luck to those who are still trying to make it. I'm very happy to announce now our last part of our day today, which is two different sessions. First, we'll have the panel discussion, and then we'll have some presentations on various topics. So let's say welcome to everybody. Delanie will be the MC for the first part of the panel discussion, and she will do the introduction, and then I will come back to you when we move to our presentation. So welcome again, everybody, and Delanie, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you, everybody, for joining. As Stefan just said, we'll start out with have this panel discussion, then you'll have a break before the presentations and discussion for the last session. And so, for this session on the credibility of data, we have a wonderful panel full of people with loads of great ideas. So that's also why I really would like to encourage everyone to ask them questions. And for them, I would like them to also not hesitate to talk to each other, because this is really not an interview. It's really meant to be that discussion where we kind of engage with each other. So each of the panelists, when they respond to the first question, will give a bit more detailed information about themselves, but just a brief introduction. We have Léna Mamalis from Louis Dreyfus Company, who's a carbon solution specialist. We've got Moody, Executive Director of the Institute for Feed Education and Research. Kurt Rosentrater, who's a professor at Iowa State University, and Robert Parker, Senior Coordinator at Aquaculture Stewardship Council. All of these panelists are deeply involved in GFLI operations on the team let's see, Léna is on the TMC together with Robert, Lara as well. Lara is the chair of the Technical Management Committee, I should say, sorry. Kurt is working together with Lara on a data collection project, and he's a new member of the Scientific Advisory Council. So they've got a lot of different expertise in their own fields, and then experience working with GFLI and trying to help us improve the way we provide data and the quality of the data that we can provide. So I will, since this is the first open session, just in case there are people in the room who aren't completely familiar with GFLI, I will just give a very brief introduction to what GFLI is, just to set the scene, and then I will ask, then we'll go into some questions about how we safeguard the quality and the credibility of the data. So GFLI is an independent nonprofit institute that was founded by the feed sector in order to develop a LCA database of feed materials in order to make it possible for feed and livestock sectors, aquaculture, to calculate environmental footprints of products in a transparent and trustworthy manner. So that's really the fundamental, that's why GFLI was created. That's the main reason that we exist. And so with all the complex work that we're doing, we have to keep going back to the fact of looking and seeing, is our data credible, transparent, and how do different sectors and actors within those sectors assess that? And so basically the way, to put it briefly, the way that we make the data available in a transparent, trustworthy manner, the fundamental aspect is that we use a harmonized methodology. So that's the first overarching step, is that our methodology is calculated in a way that it can be, the data sets can be comparable, they can be compared over time, they can be compared with each other. And this is based on, our methodology is based on the FAO's LEAP guidance for for animal feed supply chains. LEAP stands for the Livestock Environmental Assessment and Performance Partnership. So those guidance form the foundation for our methodology for how to calculate the data sets. So we first used the animal feed supply chains guidance, obviously, and then when the feed additives guidance came out from LEAP, then we adapted our methodology to be aligned with that as well. And then at the same time, we are aligned with the European Union's product environmental footprint category rules. They were originally set for the rules on feed for food producing animals. Now we're also able to work with the marine fish guidance. But this alignment with the FAO LEAP and the EU PEF guidance is, it's what ensures the overall methodological integrity of the data and the database. But we know that that's the methodological foundation, which is absolutely critical. And so we're very happy that we work together with FAO and the Commission with their guidance. But then there's another extra layers that come on top of that, of the data itself, how and all kinds of things that contribute to how credible, how trustworthy the data itself and the database as overall is seen by people who we want to be using the data. So we want different sectors and different people along the supply chain to use the data. And so this is what I would like to talk with this group about today, is how people view that the credibility of the data, how GFLI can do even better at safeguarding that credibility. So I'm going to start by asking our TMC chair to say a bit about what the Technical Management Committee does.
So I started on the Technical Management Committee for GFLI, I believe 3 years ago now, and thankfully had the leadership of Muriel from ADM, who was an excellent chair at the time for the TMC, and she gave me great insights into working with GFLI. For the last year and a half, maybe year, I don't quite remember now. I have been the chair of the Technical Management Committee, and it's been really insightful for me because as a member of the TMC, we see the inner workings of GFLI oftentimes, and we debate the inner workings of GFLI, and we have significant discussions on other elements that are very pertinent to the credibility of GFLI, how the data sets are handled, and many other questions that either the board asks us to take on or that other members or stakeholders bring up that GFLI really needs input on. So the Technical Management Committee basically serves at the behest, or we respond to GFLI's board of directors. The TMC gets nominated by members of GFLI, and then they get approved by the board of directors. And essentially, the people who serve on GFLI's Technical Management Committee are either experts in the LCA space, they're experts within the industry that are working on environmental footprinting in one way or another, or they've been tasked with providing insight. We could have folks coming from industry or academia or other spaces to build out the Technical Management Committee. We currently have 21 individuals on the Technical Management Committee. We meet on a monthly basis, roughly, and then we have working groups within that. Essentially, we're responsible for reviewing methodology updates, reviewing documentation updates, when we have questions that maybe come about how we integrate GFLI with the SBTI, the science-based, targets group, thank you. How GFLI interfaces with them, those discussions occur within the TMC. So a lot of the work of the TMC is to, one, ensure that the output and the technical output and the aspects of the database meet the needs, that we have credible information coming in, we have credible information going out. but we also look at we discuss the many ways that we can implement those needs or even be dynamic as things change, right? And ensure that we are creating a database that's credible that everybody can have access to. Thinking about the last year, I made a note of just an example of some of the types of things that we actively discuss within the Technical Management Committee. So just to give you a flavor of what we do within the TMC. So there's been a lot of discussion lately about how we move towards higher tier modeling, right? So right now, a lot of the modeling that's in GFLI, we have a lot of data that's at the national level. We have a lot of data that's driven from coefficients. And so if we want to get to a higher tier modeling, we're moving towards regional and state-based data sets here in the US and regional data sets otherwise. But what are the impacts of going to higher tier modeling? What are the impacts of having a database that has national level data and regional data? And how as a user do you decide which one you should use? And how do we communicate to people to make those types of decisions? And so that would be an example of the types of discussion we might have on higher tier modeling. We also have done things like in the last year, added a unique set of identifiers, of IDs to each of the different ingredients that are included within GFLI. So for a user, that means that you can better track those different ingredients through codes, and you can move those through your system. So if you have an API that you want to interface with the GFLI database, like having those unique identifier codes makes it easier from a programming standpoint. But for the GFLI team, in particular for the TMC, having every ingredient have a unique identifier means that we can go look at the sub numbers within that naming system and find out where we have geographies that aren't represented, or where we have ingredient types that aren't represented. And so we're using that unique identifying system to go identify where we should priority grade our ingredients coming into the database. We also do things like we just updated the methodology. So there were some modifications in the methodology or some gaps that we didn't have well documented. And so we just had a review of the methodology update. So those are the types of things that the TMC does. And I think it's a place to learn more about the GFLI and the workings of it, but it's also a place to bring the expertise that we have in the industry into the space as we solve those challenges. So that's a bit about the TMC, Delanie.
Thank you so much, Laura. Can I just ask, I'm going to share a bit about what the Scientific Advisory Council, how that builds on the work of the TMC, but I just first want to ask if Rob or Léna have any comments or thoughts about their experience working with the TMC so far.
Yeah, Laura gave a really good intro to it. For my part, I'm an academic at heart. I started LCA study work in 2008, so almost 20 years ago. I had the nice vantage point of working in the lab at Dalhousie, where Nathan Peltier and Nathan Ayer and Peter Timers were. So I got those like early aquaculture and poultry LCA discussions. I've been working with ASC more on the industry side of things for 5 years now. So I really like joining these meetings at the TMC because I get to put the academic hat back on and have these sort of smart discussions again. I really like it.
Oh, thanks, Rob.
Yeah. And if I may, so Léna Mamalis from LDC, we're a merchant and processor company for agricultural goods like cotton, soy, corn, a lot of commodities. And it's just been, I work on product carbon footprints a lot, and being able to bring my perspective or the trader's perspective into these meetings is really beneficial, and how these data will be applied, or how we can provide our information into the database. It's been really nice to be able to contribute.
Good. There's so this is how, you see that the Technical Management Committee, well, our experts are quite diverse, but the idea is that the Technical Management Committee is made up of people who are currently representing the feed sector, LCA experts and different expertise across the technical aspects of their sector. But and advise the technical management committee, as Lara said, reports directly to the board in terms of advising the board about methodological and technical matters. The Scientific Advisory Council was established by the board explicitly in order to give a more broad, an even broader and an independent review of kind of into the work of the TMC. So to support the TMC's and its mission to advise the board thought that it would be very useful as well to have for credibility as well, if we have academics, researchers, representatives of a nonprofit, IGOs that form the Scientific Advisory Council that can really that's supposed to give us a real I won't say maybe reality check isn't the right thing, to make sure that we're not talking just to ourselves, to make sure that the what we're discussing and the decisions that we're making actually do resonate well outside the feed sector, and that to support the overall credibility of the data. So for example, we've got representative from the FAO LEAP manager is on the advisory council. There's a representative from the Directorate General for Environment that coordinates the PEF, the Product Environmental Footprint. Well, either there or the Joint Research Center, depending who's available. But then we also have a representative from WWF US, who has that office has been quite collaborative with GFLI and with livestock sector as well. And then representatives from different universities and research institutes. So this is the Scientific Advisory Council meets at the most twice a year. I think we haven't managed to get them together exactly twice in the same year yet, but that's there when they agree to join us, because they're all volunteering their time. It's up to twice a year. And we pick a topic that the TMC is grappling with, or a few topics, and that we want to use them as a sounding board. Usually the TMC will propose something, with a methodological change or an update, or when the advisory council was very helpful when we were developing our branded data methodology, because they reviewed it, gave a lot of good comments. So that's the role, the complementary role that the advisory council plays. And so I just want to ask Kurt. Kurt is a brand new member, just inducted into the advisory council. He hasn't been to a meeting yet, but I'm just curious from the perspective of someone who has not been on the advisory council or the technical management committee, who is and maybe prior to the research project that you're working on, the data collection project that you're working on with Lara, didn't have direct interaction with GFLI. I'm curious from your perspective, does that do what we're hoping it does in terms of instilling confidence in the data and the institute, but mainly the data and the database? How would you say researchers who are outside the GFLI work would see that?
Well, first of all, thank you, Delanie, for the opportunity to serve on the committee. I'd like to preface all of my remarks by saying, be careful what happens when you go to coffee with Delanie, if you go to a conference in Brussels, because your arm might get twisted into joining a committee, which is great. Actually, I do appreciate this opportunity.
No.
Well, we haven't met yet, but the moment I appreciate this, because I think any organization who's trying to do this kind of work, you have to have transparency. And I know we talk about transparency when we talk about carbon accounting and life cycle assessment, but true transparency in terms of methodologies and data, but also the challenges that we have right now. No, Laura, I know AI is not going to solve all the problems. I was joking before this session began. But in reality, how do we work with companies who the first question when they find out that they have to do any type of environmental impact assessment, what's it going to cost me? Or what's it going to cost the organization? And how much time is this going to take? And what are the benefits? And so I think having GFLI, it's really in a great position to help lots of companies, but transparency and dealing with all of the challenges with data. I think the data is the biggest challenge that we have, in addition to overcoming some of the inertia that some companies may have. So I'm looking forward to seeing what we can do to help support the TMC moving forward.
Thank you, Kurt. Okay, so no, that's a good point that you raise, Kurt, about you know, kind of maybe a little bit of reluctance in the beginning to get into this work, because I think, you know, we all know that the need for life cycle assessment and footprinting and this kind of analysis is clear. But we still often hear from, you know, potential data users that they don't yet feel, you know, sufficiently motivated to make the investment in it, and to provide and to do all the work that goes into calculating a footprint, even if it's for internal use first, you know, not even going to the extent of providing a footprint for their product for a customer, for example. But so I'm just going to ask, so to the panelists, from your perspectives, you know, how important do you feel it is to be able to, you know, to provide this data for your on your product? Maybe I'll point this to Léna first, because Léna's worked on a data branded data project to provide this data for your sector, for your customers. I mean, what was the kind of the thing that motivated your company to take the leap into this kind of work?
Thank you for the question, Delanie. I think for us, you know, for LDC, supply-specific data is important. We value the fact that we want to be able to have data that's more representative of our value chain. More representative of our value chain, and also, you know, it creates, having supply-specific or branded emission factor data that we have, like we submitted to GFLI, allows us to create a foundation to track progress of the climate targets that we have or that our customers have, and it's essential to have collaboration across the value chains in terms of food and in the food value chain that we have, to share the data that we all have access to, and to achieve increased visibility on the movement of the goods globally, really, because we act on a global level.
So for you all, it's obvious you're not having to be, you didn't have to be pulled. Was it for the other panelists, for the companies or sectors that you work with? Do you see a hesitancy due to concern about how good the data is, or is this going to be a trustworthy number even, or does that come into play at all? See Rob shaking his head.
Yeah, and there's always concerns. So we have about 2,500 certified farms and about 100 certified mills. And in our standards now, every one of them is going to have to annually calculate, characterize, and report to ASC their greenhouse gas emissions using an LCA approach. We can't do that without GFLI, is the way I see it, because we provide a tool to provide data to all of the small producers that have no idea how to do this. Some of the big feed mills and the big salmon farms, they have the in-house expertise, but we need these sort of data sources to be able to do it. I don't think there's necessarily a lot of concern around some of the specific data availability concerns at the farm level. But if we're trying to communicate the performance across the whole industry, which is what ASC wants to do, we want to say, here's the performance and the tracking of greenhouse gas emissions across that whole sector on an annual basis. Then we have to start thinking about some of those challenges. But the big challenge for us is just getting it started, getting the farms on board, getting them thinking from a life cycle perspective. And then some of the stuff in the weeds will be worked out as we identify where the data quality challenges and so on.
Okay. Laura, I'm curious if you've seen, I mean, in the work that you do daily, have you seen a huge shift or a significant shift in the kind of the interest or motivation since you started with iFeeder up to now?
So I think our need for data and use of data varies a little bit by who you serve or who you are within the sector. For me, what I have seen is the customer that the feed industry serves as a driver for us working in this space, not necessarily the individual animal producer, but in the United States, for certain, the National Pork Board, right, the entity that represents the pork producers across the US, is keenly interested in, or has been interested in undertaking life cycle assessments across their pork production system. The United Egg Board has done life cycle assessments for egg producers. The dairy industry just finished updating, DMI, the Dairy Management Inc., just finished updating theirs. And so what we see are collectively animal customers across their sectors doing LCAs for their whole production system. And then we have, in the last few years, heard feedback from them around, of course, this acknowledgement that from doing an LCA across an animal production system, how significant feed is to their footprint. And then the impetus is on us to ensure that the feed is an accurate projection of that footprint, that we have the data to represent that. And so the other piece then that I've seen is our corn and soybean and other ingredient suppliers, right? The folks that are supplying into the feed industry, wanting to ensure that their data is accurately represented, right? So in the United States, we have an entity like the United Soybean Board or the National Corn Growers Association, who a significant amount of their product, right, goes into the feed space, and their desire to have that feed accurately categorized or accurately represented within any data set that's being used for footprinting. And so I think from that standpoint, in the 4.5 years that I've been working for iFeeder in the feed sector, I've certainly seen a growth of interest in that space. I think it is, we see some differences in what's happening or trending in the carbon accounting space versus the footprint space. The data needs are somewhat the same for both of those, but I do think we continue to see within the feed industry people pursuing life cycle assessments and footprints, and the trend for that, I think, continues. At least I still get questions from industry members about who to go to have them, they want to do an LCA, who should they go to do that? And so I think those questions are still occurring, especially, and we can get into this, but especially in the United States, especially if they are a subsidiary of a European company, or they're exporting into the European market, or they have customers in the European market, right? Because then they're trying to meet those the path requirements for CSRD.
Okay.
Rob Fetter, I'm from Kinetic. Thank you for letting me join here. Kinetic provides high fidelity data through the feed value chain and other agricultural value chains for worldwide farmer surveys. And so I have two questions. One is about what decisions or values are different when you invest in this higher quality data. For example, perhaps it's the value is mostly in external relations, like communications to customers or investors about what our footprint is doing over time, or compared to when we compare sourcing U.S. soy to soy from another country, for example, or maybe strategic planning is different. Like there's an indication that a customer would source feed from a different location based on a comparative footprint. So I'm just curious to understand more where the value is and what decisions or reporting is different. And then the second question related to that is what attributes of higher quality data are most appealing and create the most value? So is it that they're more up to date, or is it that they can embed like a water footprint or a water scarcity concept as well as a greenhouse gas emission concept? Or is it that you know, it's, as Laura pointed out, higher regional fidelity and state level representation or a given sub-state level representation as opposed to a national footprint. Just curious for those things. Thanks.
Is anyone?
I can jump in. This is Kurt. Yes and no. It's not necessarily that important. So humans are humans, right? And we want the most we can get for the least we have to pay, typically speaking. And what is the value on high resolution data? I think I haven't seen that value proposition yet. But what I know is, okay, so I'm currently living in the state of Iowa in the US, sort of north central portion. And thinking about today's discussion and thinking about a project that I have just recently finished working with Laura on in terms of updating corn and soy statistics and environmental impacts, inputs, specifically herbicides, pesticides, fertilizers, etc. For the corn and the soy producing states in the US, we're the top 20. And USDA was a source of data, not necessarily the most current source. I'm looking at the state of Iowa, for example, averages. So at least as of last year, there were over 86,000 farms and over 30 million acres in cultivation. And the USDA statistics is a survey. And what percentage of respondents actually respond? You know, this is our best guess. Is it very good? Probably not. What is that old saying? There are lies, damn lies, and statistics, or something like that. For us, if we're trying to say we have an environmental impact modeling ecosystem, for example, the more timely data you have, the better. The more high resolution data you have, the better. But sometimes it's that trade-off between here's what's available and this is our best guess. And sometimes, and I think this is a question we have to think about with the Scientific Advisory Committee, how close is close enough and how good is good enough? And I think that's something that our community struggles with. So to answer, but not really answer your question, there's value there, but monetarily, I'm not sure yet. I haven't seen the ROI on that yet. My written thoughts. It would be great if we could have 86,000 data points for the state of Iowa for the growing season of 2025, but we're nowhere near that.
I think just to be able to complete that, I think it's just to build on it is the fact that we still have a lot of gaps in the data sets. So I think once you've calculated one emission factor for one commodity, where it comes from, ideally you want it to be updated every year because it's representative of the year you're reporting on. However, there are so many areas that we haven't calculated yet that, you know, you want to be able to talk about all the different commodities and all the different areas so that you have a proper baseline. And then obviously you still need to update the others, but I think GFLI has a rule that it has to be updated every 2 years. You've got on the European Commission has data which has to be valid for 5 years. So there's a window on which we can work with. And it's important to be able to tackle all the commodities and all the data sets. So high tier, always better. Yes, if you've got the time and the energy and the money, then yes. But otherwise, there are other areas that you also need to concentrate on.
I have another thought. Getting off the farm, getting into the processing space. So a couple of years ago, I worked with corn refiners in the US and surveyed and collected data for approximately half of the corn wet mills in the US. First time that has ever been done. It is incredible how much variability there is in terms of energy use and water use, and then subsequently the emissions for all of the wet mills in the US. And that's just one industry that has 30 or 40 processing plants in the US. And there is no way that you can say an average is good because there's so much variability. And how do you capture that and quantify that?
I think Robert, you should weigh in whenever you want, but I'm gonna make another comment. Just because you're the one not at the table, you have to speak up or wave at us so we make sure.
I'm happy to jump in. Go ahead, though.
Your other question about what attributes of higher quality data are the most important, I've been sitting here thinking about that relative to the data that we just collected that Kurt referred to for the corn and soybean space. And in some ways, I think it's important to think about it from a sensitivity analysis. So, for example, if we're thinking about the environmental impacts or the footprint impacts of crop production, I would rather have high quality fertilizer and manure data than high quality pesticide or seed data. I recognize that seed inputs and chemistry inputs are important, but I know that the fertilizer and the manure piece bring a bigger footprint. And so I know that that's a place that if we had to pick, I would want to go after the pieces that were going to lead to a bigger footprint, whichever footprint, we're looking for. And theoretically, and yes, I know, we have to balance that against like carbon and water and everything else. I also know, at least within the US, and the topic of conversation that and Robert, that you and I have had is, manure data. Within the United States, we do not have a publicly available source of the average or manure application rate by state. It does not exist in a publicly available source. I know there are sources of it. I know that all of the concentrated animal feeding operations turn in nutrient management plans that EPA collects, and that we could get a number from that, but that is not publicly available data. There are many things that keep that data from being publicly available. And so we don't have that information as a public data source, in which case we have to go about calculating it and estimating it many different ways to get to it. I would love to have that number. Why? Because that number is a benefit. The more manure we put down in a footprint situation is a benefit to the feed and animal industry, because it has a different bit of accounting on it. And so to me, that's an extremely high quality data input that would be extremely valuable to have. We don't have it. It hurts us right now, and we need to be able to get it. So I think if you think about the quantification from a sensitivity analysis, we could identify the data points that we would love to have more accurately available to us.
Yeah, I think, Laura, to put it in other words, it's better to go hunting elephants than chasing mice. Right? Identify what really matters and do it. I want to pick up on Kurt's point about uncertainties. In the talks that I've had with retailers and brands and processors, in recent years, they've become less interested in what is the specific number and is the specific number accurate, and more interested in informing actions to demonstrate that they're taking actions. So how much uncertainty addressing, how much metadata, how much quality of data do you need to support a decision to take an action is the level that you need. You don't necessarily need better quality data than that. You can imagine if you have two different products that are the numbers are within a narrow band of uncertainty, a choice to take an action there isn't necessarily going to achieve anything, because you don't really know if one's higher than the other. But the big picture items, where you know that this product is definitely going to carry a heavy, heavy burden compared to our alternatives, you can take action there and be confident that the numbers are supporting it without necessarily needing to worry as much about the uncertainty ranges.
It's making me think. So what implications would that have for the work that GFLI does, for example, and the way we're thinking about higher tier modeling?
I think, well, we don't really we don't communicate much about uncertainty right now, do we? We have sort of single values, and we have a lot of decimal places on those values, which maybe gives the impression of a lot of precision. I think where we can improve things a lot is communication of what are the limitations. How would a responsible LCA practitioner use these data, and how wouldn't they?
Mm.
We do have another question in the room.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Sure.
Please announce yourself and
Thanks. Carlos Suarez with US Currents and Bioproducts Council. Touching upon a few of those points, in terms of who you actually uses the data linked to its credibility. One of the things that we've been discussing with certain interlocutors is the volatility of the data as well. So from our organization's point of view, we try to build capacity with our interlocutors, the companies that are purchasing our ingredients, and try to get them to understand, based on LCA needs, not a widespread skill. And then how our own data fits into that. And so once you get there, it becomes very important that you're able to explain changes in the data. And again, this is not something that everybody understands easily. And we were talking about that just last night. So for example, for GFLI, as you have iterations in the database, updates, it becomes very important for people who have made claims, who have taken a decision, sometimes not an LCA expert, but rather a purchasing manager who's been told, look, this particular ingredient is better in terms of carbon intensity or whatever other attribute. And then the data changes from one day to the next. And so that particular person, official within a company, is left wondering, okay, was I misreporting the data? And so it leaves people in a lot of difficult positions in terms of explaining. So that's when, we're gonna turn to GFLI and say, I really need help. Because, you also stake part of your arguments on the credibility of GFLI data. And so those changes become very, very important.
I mean, one thing along the volatility lines and, Robert with Kinetic, we've been talking about access to proprietary data and the ability to get, really the ability to get more granular data. So there's two things that can happen. One is that when we update a data set per GFLI's DQR, the data quality guidelines, that if we update the data sets every 2 to 3 years, and it just so happens that the 2 or 3 year period that we are updating to, maybe it was a bit of a drought period, or maybe the previous period was a very high yielding period, right? We can influence the data out, like the data outcome can change based on the cropping years that we had. Ideally, we are required within GFLI to pull data across multiple cropping years. So we hope to balance that out some, but that doesn't always happen. The other challenge that we have, and we don't know the answer to this until we look at it, and I would say iFeeder, we're trying to get funding together to take on a project to look at this, is if we're using the publicly available data set and we can get to more granular data through access to some proprietary data, having the more granular data doesn't necessarily mean the footprint's going to go down. It should mean the footprint becomes more accurate, but it doesn't mean that it's going to go down. And so I think this is an implication, right, that we want to understand as well, is as we get more certainty in the data set, what is the impact of adding that level of certainty on the existing data sets? And that's an answer we don't have right now. And so in perfect world, within the next year, we start tackling that. We have a potential project with the Foundation for Food and Agronomic Research and some of our partnering crop associations here in the US with iFeeder and GFLI, potentially to take that on. But I think that's, that's a definite question, right? Which we will grapple with, right? Is either the volatility in the data years or the change as we move to more granular data.
And I think what's encouraging there is that when you engage with GFLI staff and within the community, you actually get those, methodological answers. That is the encouraging part. And from a user side, one of the things that perhaps, maybe a request will be that as you have significant changes, at a given level, maybe that triggers the requirement for an explanation that, is reflected either at time of database updating, so that, users can easily go and say, look, the reason why this changed was because methodologically we had this shift in terms of the land use time period or something along those lines. That it's not, because one of the things that is very valuable in relation to GFLI is to be able to say, look, it's not us, industry X or sector X, saying that this is so, but rather a third party that is neutral actually providing that explanation. So that would be very valuable.
Could I maybe add some pessimism to the room? Sorry, you made me think about some conversations that I've had with people at USDA in terms of the National Ag Statistics Service, the Economic Research Service. So I don't know if anybody in the room remembers, but for many years, the USDA was compiling statistics with annual surveys for the ethanol processing industry, specifically energy use and water use. Hossein Shukuri was the lead researcher at the Economic Research Service. He retired several years ago, and when he retired, USDA stopped collecting the efficiency data from ethanol plants, which was really helpful if you were trying to understand what is the energy efficiency and the water efficiency, not just of ethanol, but specifically for the U.S. Grains and Bioproducts Council, the DDG, for example. And so follow-up conversations with folks at ERS and at NASS, they put out their monthly co-products report for both corn and soy processing, but I'm not necessarily encouraged when I talk to my colleagues at USDA in terms of, well, so-and-so was retired last year and our priorities are changing, so we're probably going to stop doing this specific survey or that specific survey. So I think a challenge for us is to, especially those that are located in the US, to develop relationships with the USDA researchers at ERS and at NASS and explain what it is our data needs are and what the industry's data needs are. And even if specific things aren't priorities anymore, maybe they should be, because they matter for the feed industry for sure. And with more retirements that have happened this year, I think it's even more important for us in the feed sector to develop relationships with new people at NASS and at ERS. So maybe that's not so pessimistic, but I think realistically, and we're talking publicly available data, I think it's important we continue to have this data collected, because it's not just iFeeder that uses this data or GFLI that uses this type of data, but lots of organizations use this type of data.
Mindful of the volatility comment and of Laura's comment that just because you're using more granular or more, even if there's more higher number of respondents in the survey, it's not necessarily a lower factor, and that creates issues for companies that are using these factors. I was thinking about okay, so 3 thoughts. One is that I also appreciate that GFLI is not just as a provider of data, but a provider of sort of curated data and accompanying technical assistance. Because exactly when the factors change, that it's, it comes with an explanation, a sort of, felt obligation to provide the explanation for the users of the data. So, yeah, maybe, and very mindful of your point about volatility. Also, moving averages are great. And when the data can be collected year over year, it creates the opportunity to have a moving average for a slower, a lot less volatile over time series, as opposed to these USDA surveys that are intermittent and, often years out of date and sort of cobbled together. At this point, I work for a firm that does primary data collection year over year for hundreds of thousands of farmers, right? So, I don't have that problem anymore, but in my old life, I totally had that problem. And I know firsthand the pain of cobbling together tens of different data sources to produce a factor that, uses this methodology for this piece and this methodology for this piece. And I think these are comparable, but I spent 16 hours making sure. Now I have to document that. So yes, I appreciate that point as well. The other point that I was going to make is about back to Laura's comment about just because of a factor is more precisely measured doesn't mean it's lower. So when I talk to prospective customers about investing in our data for their supply chain footprinting, I emphasize the value of the actions that can be different because you have this more granular and more updated data. And so that's sort of the genesis of my prior question. If the important thing is to have a just a number that's trending down over time, then as Kurt mentioned, invest the least you can to get a number that's trending down over time. But if you want to, ask a question like, suppose I'm interested in participating in a value chain collaboration where we invest some money to help farmers adopt more regenerative practices and therefore, improve their soil health, improve their gross margins, improve the economic stability of the farm, and reduce the emissions footprint because there's less inputs needed, then where should I do that? Right? And if I'm using that 10-year-old cobbled together USDA data sources, I don't have any visibility on that decision set. But if I'm using annually updated data from a representative sample of, 800 farmers in Iowa and 600 farmers in Indiana and then I can, and I have, not just the 5 top practices, but a comprehensive set of the actions that they take and ideally why. Well, that gives me some power to identify what is the action I need to take to strategize, to prioritize, to plan, to invest, to work with others on the value chain, like the off-taker, who typically have more money to invest in improving farmer livelihoods, and improving community resilience, and improving emissions footprints. So I think more about the decisions that better data enables than the accuracy of the data itself. Although, of course, I work for a research company, and I care a lot about the accuracy of the data. But from a value perspective, I think more about the action set that different data enables.
I think a lot of users of the data think the same way. We want to support a decision to take an action, and we need data to do that. We don't need perfect data to do it, but we need data that's good enough to do it.
How do people come and the companies that you're working with in your sector, Rob? Like, for example, are there consistent things that trigger their, good enough? Or is it really depend on who they're reporting to and
It probably depends on the sector, right? So you have some sectors where salmon has a very low feed conversion ratio. Net pen salmon requires very little energy, so they're used to being able to demonstrate a pretty low footprint. So then there's a marketing value to them to just get the data, get it updated as good quality as it can, and then communicate and market. There's an excitement, I guess, in that sector, and in a lot of sectors, the goal is just to try to start figuring this out because they haven't gone on the same 20-year journey that salmon has gone on to be able to get good quality data and to be able to figure out methods. So it really varies, the size of farm, the sort of maturity with which they're tackling LCA, the species, the region. It's really hard to sort of put the same stamp on everybody and say, here's what they need in terms of data quality. We're trying in our standards now to at least get everybody to a baseline where everybody's calculating and characterizing and reporting their emissions, knowing that there's going to be errors, there's going to be data quality challenges and stuff, but get them at a baseline where they're starting to do this and reporting back, and then we can learn from that data and provide some guidance back as a feedback to say, here's how to get even better, and get to the point where they can become confident that, hey, we've identified that You know, maybe we're a recirculating farm and feed matters, but energy use at our farm really matters. And that's where we're going to tackle things. That's where we're going to try to reduce our emissions. Or maybe we're a net pen salmon farm and 95% of our emissions come from the feed. And most of that is associated with deforestation. So it's about finding those supply chains that are deforestation free, right? Just enough to support those actions.
Mm. I was going to ask, I wanted to check with Léna about to switching gears a bit to thinking about the value of branded data, and how, and also I'd like feedback from Kurt as well, if that's data that research sector is looking at as well, when you're doing different kinds of comparative analyses. But maybe just to ask Léna's experience first with how, how well received is the information from your customers, and is there, are they getting what they want, or are you able to provide what they want by having done the calculation for our methodology?
So that touches on multiple points, and I think it also touches on what Carlos said about the data will also depend on who your customer is and what they're looking for. So we provided a branded emission factor to GFLI for soy. We went through that process. I think the hardest part was to collect that data, because having primary data is super valuable, as you've mentioned, to be able to have that historical data and be able to say, well, we can make that decision based on this data, and we've seen this, and therefore why. It's super good, but it's costly, and you need to be able to have traceability, which can be very tricky in certain supply chains. But now that we've done the work, we've got a baseline, and it's a mix of, primary, we got a DQR number, and so it's a mix of primary and secondary data. It's hard to get any primary data, but having this emission factor allows us to have the representativeness of our value chain, which is super important for us, because it also allows us to see where we're at, and then to be able to track the progress in the future, whether it's towards our targets or towards our customers, to be able to differentiate between the country average versus our supply sheds. There's the target, so the representative, you've got to target progress, you've got to try and meet the customers' requirements and expectations in terms of the data. And I do think that having this branded data shows that, because there's also the data quality requirement that kind of measures how good your data is. More granular is better. We're moving towards granularity, and we want branded emission factor, and I think we should encourage to have granular emission factor to support emission factor mapping, have this baseline. But it takes time, it's costly, and so I say yes to branded data.
I'm interested, Léna, just, knowing that you've been working on the branded data space for your organization, what ingredients are you putting in as branded data? Like, what ingredients are you guys adding to the database?
We've added soy Argentina, soy meal Argentina. Soy meal, because we're also processing a company, and we process in Argentina.
Yeah.
Soy. So we've got primary data at that point. We added as much as we could. Yeah. And we also,
That's okay.
then we also, because we have a partnership with Adasra, who has a platform Orbe, which GFLI included this year. And having that, we've worked with them to be able to have their polygons and our information, even not just at polygons, but at county level, or not county level because we're in Argentina, but municipality information, which is now free on Orbe, is very practical. Some sort of primary data, well, better secondary data, improved secondary data.
I was just thinking about it because I think when some people think about branded data, they think about a company's specific proprietary product. Some brand label ingredient, as we all know, feed ingredients are way more than just corn and soy-based products. And so I think sometimes people think about branded products. At least I do think about that branded data as special labeled ingredients, but it also includes like what you're talking about, which is a soybean meal that you all are using coming from a specific place that you want that number to be available. And so you've gone and made that number available.
It is, yeah, but it is still somewhat branded because it is representative of
your,
sourcing,
right.
To a certain extent with our factories, our plants. So
Yeah.
it is to some extent.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's branded, it's a branded commodity product, kind of, versus I'm thinking about it as, like what I'm thinking about is something like it's a specific, like it's a processed product versus, I don't know, methionine or something like that. Like somebody might choose to like a very label specific, yeah. Branded can mean a lot of things.
It can be. And in this case, it really is more about us sourcing LDC, what
Of a
we've done.
specific type of ingredient.
Exactly, and the positive impacts that we've managed to have within our value chain, traceability and all that information in that mission factor, show our progress where we can, show how we compared to databases that has information from 2014 versus, more accurate, more recent data that our customers can use. And eventually the aim is to be able to, allow clients to do their reporting and be able to claim improvements on that without our improvements disappearing through rebaselining, which you can in so many different ways, because the year that you're using of your emission factor isn't correct because the data didn't exist at the time, so you've got to re-update it. The fact that, the type of area that you were looking at, if you were looking at your high level, so low tier data versus high tier data, you've got a rebaseline and you might lose, as you say, because if you have more granular data, that emission factor could increase instead of reduce because you've got more visibility. There's multiple things that come into play, but I think either way, branded data or supply specific data is valuable. Costly, but valuable.
And Kurt, are you seeing a shift in what the data that's being used in your research projects and that maybe that people are looking for in academic reporting that you're doing?
So that's an interesting question, and I think it's full of a lot of different shades of answers. It depends. And that's what I tell students. It depends. They don't like to hear that answer. If this is purely an academic life cycle assessment type of study, what I've seen in the life cycle assessment field has been, I hate to say radical transparency, but journals nowadays want all of your data to be published alongside the narrative of the paper, which is fine. However, if you're working with an industry, for example, and maybe it's your company and a variety of other companies to try to get an industry average, then there are kind of limits in terms of how transparent you can be. And most companies want anonymized data as opposed to company-specific data. And so that's why I say, Delanie, it really depends.
Yeah.
And then if you have a company, like I have a company that would come to me and say, we're being forced to do our carbon accounting. What do we need to do and how much is it going to cost? Well, that's not an academic study. That's an actual, a consultancy type of thing. And so in that case, that is purely internal for a company. It may require branded data or anonymized data, but so I guess it really depends on what's the purpose of whatever the initiative is.
Yeah.
There's no one size fits all, unfortunately.
That's what we found out. Yeah. Everything depends on. Yeah. Well, I'm getting through most of my questions, so I'm just gonna was thinking about asking all of you to think about if there's anything that you really wanted to say as part of this panel in terms of from your sector, from your members or your stakeholders' perspective if there were things that the GFLI Technical Management Committee and Scientific Advisory Council and the Secretariat should be prioritizing in order to make our data more accepted, more to meet the requirements that you and your stakeholders have. It's probably lots of things that come to mind, but if you came to the panel thinking, okay, I'm going to finally have my chance to say, focus on this, this is your chance to do it. Okay, Rob's so excited. This is your chance to do it. And I think Kurt has one, because when I was plying him with coffee to trick him into helping us with stuff, I think you came up with something that you thought we should work on too. So maybe I'll let Rob say his piece first.
Yeah, so aquaculture feed tends to look a little different than a lot of chicken, pork, beef feed. Historically, a lot of fish meal, a lot of fish oil, and we do have fairly good data coming into GFLI for that. But there's a lot more reliance on some things where there's big data gaps still in GFLI or in AgriFootprint or other databases. One is byproducts. I did an LCA in Australia, and Australian salmon feed was about 40% byproducts from poultry and livestock. That was the composition of byproducts in it. And you can imagine that then carries a very large impact, regardless of what methods and allocation you're using. Just the extent of its inclusion is going to be really important. If you're thinking from a life cycle perspective, then the feed that you feed to the chicken matters a whole lot, because the chicken is then going to translate into chicken byproduct, which is going to translate into salmon feed, which is going to translate into salmon. I think right now in GFLI, there's one row for poultry oil, one row for feather meal, and they're based on data from the Netherlands. If you go to the United States, you're going to have a very corn-heavy feed in chicken, I think. But if you go to Brazil, you're going to have a very Amazon soy-heavy feed for chicken. So that's going to translate through impacts all the way to salmon. So we need to radically improve, I think, the availability of byproducts from fisheries for human consumption, from poultry and from livestock at the impact assessment level. You have all the tools available to you to calculate these. You have the feed inputs to the chicken in front of you in GFLI, but having those available as inputs to select from would be really useful. We see a very similar data gap in micro ingredients, vitamins, amino acids, things like astaxanthin, which makes salmon nice and orange. Having much more data available for those rather than some just sort of blanket micro ingredient options. And the third one I have is novel ingredients, things like insect feeds. Maybe this is where branded data come in. Things like single cell proteins. I've seen presentations by big feed companies saying that these novel ingredients are going to help them move towards their SBTI targets. Well, you need data to support that. You need to be able to test that assertion. So those are my three big data gaps that I'd love to see GFLI help to fill. And I think GFLI partnering with research institutions and universities, I don't think it would be a difficult ask, because I bet there's a lot of researchers that would love to see their data, the outputs of their work have a reach into industry through a group like GFLI.
Great. Good. Who else is chomping at the bit to give us some good advice?
Go for it, Kurt. You know you are.
Okay, so optimist or pessimist? Which would you like me to play, Delanie?
Realist.
Realist.
Yeah.
Okay, so just thinking about, I've kind of divided my thoughts into data, process, and software overall. And, thinking about an organization who is wanting to do a life cycle assessment or a carbon footprint or a water footprint, or I have no idea what we have to do, just tell me what I need to do and tell me how much it's going to cost. I think that's a question that I come across time and time again. And the follow-up question then is, do I hire a consultant for $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 to do this for me, or do I do this in-house? And what kind of training, what kind of tools are available to me to use in-house? And I think this is a gap that GFLI can really help fill, but it's more than just providing the software. This is a longer term conversation, I think, that we're going to have with your committee and my committee in terms of, okay, we've got this amazing set of updated information for feed ingredients, how do we use it? Or how do you use it? And how do we make it easier for companies to use? So I think process is one of the buckets I have been thinking a lot about lately. And then the software also, why don't I just hire an organization to do this for me, and they will do all the calculations and all of the reporting for me? Well, actually, it's not as simple as that, because companies still have to do the work in terms of quantification, whether it's energy or water or whatever it is. They still have to do legwork themselves. So there's no free lunch, actually. So, and then in terms of the data, I've talked a little bit about some of the challenges with the US federal government in terms of data collection. And I'm a fan of USDA data. I have used it for decades for a variety of purposes, not just environmental impact analysis. And so I think there's value there, but I think my challenge to the folks who are involved with GFLI is how do you foster relationships, not just with the people in the US government, but in other countries' governments as well? Because I think there is a specific role that governments have in terms of data collection that is a bit different than the role of private entities. And I think there's a role for private entities too. But I do think the way that USDA data conducts its surveys and does its guesstimations, because some of these reports are guesstimations, there's some unreliability with some of this information also. We every year have multiple times where, and I'll just use the US context because I follow the WASDE reports, and they specifically this year relied solely on satellite imaging to calculate potential yield and potential land use. And I know other countries do the same thing. And this does get into some of the conversation we had, Laura, before the meeting started today. How could we leverage what federal governments are doing in terms of data collection with satellite imagery and yield estimations, but then also environmental impact estimations? I think there's an opportunity with GFLI to foster some of these relationships. I will say in terms of specific data versus aggregate data. So I'm just curious, how many in this room have ever been to the state where I currently live, Iowa? Has anyone been to Iowa? It's not as flat as you think it is. Actually, there is geography, and the different geographies do impact production agriculture, whether you're talking about animal agriculture or crop-based agriculture. And so I think geographic impacts are masked within the aggregate factors. Then I think that's something we need to someday wrap our heads around. I know it's going to be a ways out, but I think that's something that we ignore to our detriment. Manure fertilizer versus synthetic fertilizer. Laura, we had so many discussions about that. And I think that is something that we really need to address. And it's so enlightening when you look at production agriculture in the US and animal agriculture in the US. And adjacent states will have completely different fertilizer types of applications because of different livestock numbers, but also production practices. And so there's a lot of layers to this as we try to build something that's going to be useful for the future. And then, Delanie, I think the one you were talking about over coffee was the peat estimation and land use estimation. In some parts of the world, there's more peat, and in other parts, there is less peat. So thinking about the state of Iowa, where I'm from, for example, there's not a lot of peat ground that is being converted into corn ground in the past several decades. So I could keep going, Delanie, if you'd like me to keep going. You asked me for my reference. Are you sure that adding me to the scientific advisory committee was a good choice?
Yes, we need some more chatty people.
I'll have questions about a lot of things, and I think to our detriment, and I've seen this with a lot of computer modeling, You just use the software without understanding the why behind the what. And I think our opportunity with GFLI is we also provide the what and the how, not just do the calculation and there it is. So my random thoughts for the day.
Thank you. Thank you.
I guess I'm next.
Go for it.
I think we've touched upon a lot of topics there. So I think I think I'm going to boost the branded data portion. I think it's really important to keep communicating on that and putting that forth. At the end of the day, I mean, physical traceability will be required on the GHGP, to be able to claim for, to be able to have improvement claims to count towards corporate inventory, which is important because you've got the PCF portion. We also have corporate inventory, and at some point, you do both at the same time. So you don't want to split your work all the time. And so having that branded data pushed forwards I think is super important. And then, stay up to date with the methodologies that are coming out, with the new exciting guidance that we've been waiting for, land sector and removals, and making sure that everything is aligned and that we're not adding a new standard or a new way to do things, because there's already too many out there that companies need to apply to all of them. And so if we could have some continuity and consistency here, everything would be good. But I'm happy about GFLI, and they've done a lot of work over the year, so it's been good. That's personal opinion.
Okay. And Lara.
I've been over here jotting a few notes down.
I know.
Based on other folks they've been saying. I mean, one place for me is to have more entities that see the value of GFLI investing in data in projects into GFLI. So I know we have folks here in the room, and I'm sure online, I know here at the table, that are definitely doing that. But in the US, we've really, iFeeder and some others have made a point of getting databases, getting data sets updated, finding stakeholders that are also interested in it, that are helping us get those data sets updated. And I would love to see that happen to more of the data sets within GFLI, right? And so that we are continually doing that. And I think it's incumbent on us as GFLI to make them see and understand the value in doing that. Like, why should somebody invest in a data in project, and what's the benefit to them? And being able to help them see that. Like for us, I know that in the US, our customers, the animal ag groups, the organizations and others, have a vested interest in us having good GFLI numbers because they are using them. Similarly, I know that our corn and soybean and sorghum and processing organizations, they see a vested interest in having good data there because it's driving exports for them. It's driving, their customers understanding the impact of that feed. And so I would love to see us be able to have more geographic entities or geographic regions be able to understand that and be actively working to bring in more data sets. And I know it's happening, but I think there's more of it. I mean, we would recognize that we have a pretty Euro-Americas centric, and I include South America in that too, database, and that we have, we need to get more Australian data, and we need to have more Asian data, and we need to have data from India. And so how do we get other folks invested in bringing data, because they're part of, it is the Global Feed LCA Institute. And so how do we do that? And then I would say further, as we think about the value standpoint, something that I know some colleagues have talked about, we were just chatting about it before lunch as well, is how do we use the GFLI data to show benefit? Like, why should somebody care about it, right? Well, we have this opportunity to talk about the impact that we can have on animal production. And we can do that because we can do some comparisons. Here's a ration that's made up of this, and here's a ration that's made up of this, and here's the difference that we can gain. Or if we add this to a ration, it has this impact on production, and so we can quantify that. And we don't have a standard way of quantifying that. And I recognize that may not be GFLI's take, but GFLI would certainly benefit from that type of calculation, because then more people would see why they need to be using GFLI data, or more people would see why they need to be spending time adding data to GFLI, so that we can do those types of calculations across the industry for our customers. So I think the point is, we need more people investing in data in projects so that we continue to grow the database, but it's a little bit circular in that in order for those folks to do that, they need to better continue to understand the value. And I think that is where GFLI has an opportunity, is to help them see the value of doing that so that they invest in that effort.
No, there are no further questions, Delanie. So I would like to close this session, first of all, by thanking the panelists. Very much appreciated. And I think a lot of good insights and a lot of good discussion. And also thank you, Delanie, for moderating and starting off with some very, very good questions.